Question. Have you ever been pulled over by a police officer? It can cause your anxiety to spike, but imagine what that can be like for someone on the autism spectrum. When certain actions are misinterpreted by law enforcement, mistakes can happen.
Hey, you drinking or doing drugs?
Adelie chin strap, Emperor Gen 2.
Hey.
Adelie chin strap, Emperor Gen 2.
I'm talking to you.
Adelie chin strap, Emperor Gen 2.
Hey, what you been taking? You tweaking? Sam, whoa. Hey!
No, it's okay. He has
I don't know
autism.
who you are, but you need to step back.
Don't get it.
I said get on the ground! Get on the ground!
It's a scary world out there.
That clip was from the Netflix series Atypical, about the life of an autistic young man. Joining us with an effort through Crime Stoppers to make sure both sides have more awareness is Dr. Karen Jaggers. She's a clinical psychologist and mom to a son on the autism spectrum. Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Master's in mental health, doctorate in clinical psychology, as I mentioned, Crime Stoppers board of directors and certified autism specialist. All that comes together to make you an expert in this program we're talking about. But probably one of the other things that makes you the extra expert is being the mom to Dalton.
Absolutely. It's my highest qualification.
Yeah, all right. So Dalton comes into this world, got his, 10 fingers, 10 toes. And then when did you notice something was different?
When he was 2 years old.
Cute. Yeah.
Isn't he cute?
Yeah.
When he was 2 years old, he started losing language and stopped making eye contact.
Did you know what that meant when
No,
they said
but my next door neighbor was a special ed teacher, and she says, I think you need to get this checked out.
Yeah. And when you hear the words, we think autism.
Right.
Like
well, they were very scary 25 years ago
Yeah.
because all the interns would come in to see the little boy with autism because it was so rare.
Yeah. And today we have Autism Awareness Month. And,
Right. And 1 in 31.
Yeah, because the numbers are growing, aren't they? All right. Support and development, of course, is one of the most important things. Early intervention, we call it ABA therapy. He went to the parish school, Focus Academy, and the family focused on getting him the best support he needed so he could be the best he could be.
Correct.
And that is so important, right?
Right. When he was diagnosed at 2, the doctor literally said to us, save your money because by the time he's a teen, he'll be in an institution.
Wow.
And I wasn't writing off my 2-year-old.
No.
But, but for everybody who doesn't write off their 2-year-old, there's just as many people who do write off their 2-year-olds because they believe the expert and they just didn't know much about it.
Yeah. And that early intervention has paid off. He's 29 years old today, happy and independent.
Yes.
What's he doing today?
He is working for Launch Academy as an IT guy. I don't know what that means because I'm not an IT person.
He probably knows a lot more
He's
about it
doing
than we
something
do,
with
right?
AI and an app for them.
Yeah.
So
one of the crazy things about autism is that it doesn't look the same in everybody. There are different
Right.
levels. There's a wide range, and high functioning people can seem like they're fine, but various things can set them off. But they're able to drive, they're able to go to work, able to answer questions honestly, but still can have some misunderstanding in terms of behaviors. And let's talk about some of that communication style. Not responsive or may ignore authority, not because they're trying to be rude.
Right. So many of the people on the autism spectrum may be 18 years old, but they may be emotionally 12. And so that poses...
Or even younger in some cases.
Right. And so that poses a problem sometimes in offices because they're very stuck on justice and injustice, and they'll just call you out.
Yeah.
And...
angry outburst oftentimes. Sensory reactions. You hear, like we saw in that little piece, that little clip right there, you heard that siren. That siren can be very jarring.
Absolutely.
All right.
Imagine driving a car and being pulled over by a policeman and the flashing lights and the siren.
Yeah. Panic attacks, and the other thing, and what those panic attacks may look like. You heard the officer say, have you been tweaking? Have you been using drugs? But literal interpretations is another thing that we see.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like they don't know how to lie, right?
They don't. Absolutely.
And you have such a great example of why it is important to have this understanding with police officers and the autistic person themselves and their families to have that conversation with them. Give us an example of a young man who was pulled over for driving badly and they thought for sure he was drinking.
Okay. I had a patient who was this huge guy, 6'7", huge guy.
So it could be threatening just walking.
Yes, intimidating just to see him. Horrible driver. He got pulled over for driving, and they pulled him over and they said, have you been drinking? And he said, yes. So they called for backup because here is this 6'7", 350-pound guy, and he's acting really nervous and he won't look at them, and it's seeming very shifty. So he calls for backup, so then there's 2 police cars there. And at some point he gets they have him out of the car, and he's up against the car, and he says, "Oh yeah, Dr. Jaggers said that if I ever get pulled over, the first thing I'm supposed to tell you is that I have autism." So that de-escalated a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, I think they called me because this was 15 years ago and they really weren't familiar with how to work with disabilities.
And it de-escalated, but still he said he had been drinking.
Yes, and so they called me and they were like, we have your client here, and I said, "Oh, well, good. I'm give him a ticket because he's a horrible driver."
Yep.
I thought that was a great lesson. And then they said, "Well, we can give him a ticket and let him go for that, but we're going to have to bring him in for DWI." And I was like, "Excuse me?" And he's like, "He said he had 5 drinks." And I said, "Ask him what he had to drink." And he said, "He won't tell us." And I said, "You tell him, Dr. Jaggers, that you better tell him
what you had to drink," because you're like, "I assure you it was alcohol."
And so they say that to him, and he says Sprite. And the guy goes, "He said Sprite."
Yeah, and the reason why.
Right, and I said, Did you ask him what he was drinking when you asked him if it had 5 drinks?" And he was like, "No." And so for him, he was answering, but he also didn't want to tell you it was Sprite because he was in trouble because his parents didn't want him drinking soft drinks.
Yeah, you can't have so many sodas. Yeah,
it's just a different perspective.
Yeah, and so in that perspective is how kind of the Crime Stoppers Needs program was born. So the neurodiversity, educate, empower, deliver, and safety. So explain the birth of that program and what you seek to do.
Okay. 3 years ago, Michelle Hines, who is another board member for Crime Stoppers with me, convinced Crime Stoppers that we need to have a program to educate first responders on how to work with individuals with disabilities, and vice versa, how to educate the individuals with disabilities on how to work with the first responders.
Yeah, because they get some training in some places for about half an hour, but this is actually an 8-hour training program.
Correct.
And so they can go through simulations and the whole bit, but the thing that's so important is to also educate the person on the spectrum, like in this case, "Oh yeah, my doctor told me I'm supposed to tell you," right?
Right. Precinct 1 is doing a lot of the training, and they were the first precinct to jump on board with this, and they have already had a number of instances where individuals who have done the training have made a significant difference in an arrest because they realized it was autism.
Yeah. All right. So they get to see these videos. They share them with parents, share them with the person who's autistic, and law enforcement. And it's part of it's having to fight stereotypes as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And those stereotypes can be some of the things that we just talked about. Somebody who, you're a drug addict, or you're this, or you're just being adversarial.
Right, and so many of the individuals who are the higher function individuals don't look like they have a disability.
Yeah.
So you would not guess that they are going to be overly literal or overly justice oriented. Or have sensory issues.
And their reaction is going to be, even like when they're afraid, may run.
Yes,
and what does running look like?
Right.
Yeah, all right. How can the general public help to de-escalate a situation? It would be hard for us to tell why somebody may be having a breakdown or a meltdown out in public, but what's the best way to de-escalate something like that?
To educate themselves, but also, you have to ask, is this something that they're doing on purpose? Is it because they can't or they won't? When they're having a behavior.
Yeah.
So.
But try not to make the situation worse.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Jaggers, thank you very much, and it's nice to see that Crime Stoppers is. It's not just calling in tips and things. There's so many other things that we're doing to try to make things safer for everybody.
And this Friday we have a presentation at Crime Stoppers at 11:30.
Okay. All right. Dealing with this.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. To learn more about Crime Stoppers of Houston and their needs program, visit crime-stoppers.org, and we'll connect you. And as she mentioned, there is a presentation this Friday at 11:30.